Welcome. Today, we're going to tackle a really critical topic, one that directly impacts patient survival: antifungal susceptibility testing. We're going to break down the drugs, the lab methods, and most importantly, how you can translate a test result into a life-saving clinical decision. So let's dive right in. We're facing a serious challenge in modern medicine: a surge in invasive fungal infections, coupled with the growing problem of antifungal resistance. And look, this isn't some theoretical threat. It's a daily reality in clinics and hospitals all over the world, and it's forcing us to be much smarter and faster in our approach to treatment. To really get a handle on the solutions we have, we first need to appreciate the scale of this threat, because the landscape of fungal disease, it's changing, and it's changing fast. What we're seeing is really a perfect storm. On one side, incredible medical advances have created a larger population of immunocompromised patients, think cancer or transplant patients, who are highly vulnerable to these infections. And on the other side, we're seeing the emergence of these really formidable pathogens, like Candida auris, which can be resistant to multiple classes of antifungal drugs. What that means is that our first-line therapies are failing more often, making rapid, accurate testing absolutely essential for our patients to survive. So, what weapons do we actually have in this fight? Our antifungal toolkit is pretty limited, which is exactly why understanding how each class works is so important. Let's do a quick review of the primary agents we use to combat these infections. Now, what's really fascinating here is the diversity of targets. Each of these classes exploits a completely different vulnerability in the fungal cell. The pollines, like our workhorse amphotericin B, are fungicidal. They directly bind to ergosterol in the cell membrane, literally punching holes in it that cause lethal leakage. The azoles, on the other hand, are generally fungostatic. They inhibit an enzyme that's essential for making that ergosterol, which disrupts the membrane and just halts fungal growth. Now, the echinocandins are pretty unique because they target the fungal cell wall, a structure our human cells don't even have. They inhibit glucan synthesis, which leads to cell lysis. And finally, you have pyrimidines, like flucytosine, which get inside the cell and mess up DNA and RNA synthesis. Understanding these distinct mechanisms, that's really the foundation of rational therapy.
Okay, so with all these different drugs, unique fungal species, and this rising specter of resistance, how do we choose the right weapon for the right bug? Well, this is precisely where antifungal susceptibility testing, or AST, becomes absolutely indispensable.
At its core, AST is a laboratory test. It's pretty straightforward, really. We take the fungus that was isolated from a patient, and we expose it to an antifungal drug in a controlled environment. The goal is simple: find out exactly how much of that drug it takes to stop that specific fungus from growing. The entire process of AST really boils down to one single critical value: the minimum inhibitory concentration, or MIC. This number represents the absolute lowest drug concentration that managed to inhibit the fungus from growing in the test. It's the single most important piece of data we get from this whole process. So how do we find this MIC? Well, the gold standard is the broth microdilution method. Just picture a microtiter plate. In each well, we put progressively lower concentrations of an antifungal drug. Then, we add a standardized amount of the patient's fungus to every single well, and we incubate it. After about 24 to 48 hours, we just look for the first well where the growth was stopped. That concentration, that's our MIC. And this is so important to remember. While the principle is the same, standardization is key. You've got two major bodies that set these standards: CLSI in North America and EUCAST in Europe. And they have slightly different protocols. They use different media, different amounts of the fungus, and even different reading methods. These subtle differences can sometimes lead to different MIC values. It's crucial to be aware of this, because an MIC from a lab using EUCAST standards might differ from one using CLSI, and that could potentially impact how we interpret the results. Okay, getting that MIC value is really only half the battle. A number like 2 micrograms per ml is completely meaningless without context, so the next critical step is translating that lab result into a clinical action plan. This is the single most important question a clinician asks. Is this MIC low enough that a standard dose of the drug is actually going to work in my patient, or do I need to choose a different therapy altogether? The answer lies in something called clinical breakpoints. Now, these aren't just arbitrary numbers. They are meticulously established MIC cutoffs. They're derived from analyzing huge distributions of MICs, pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic data, how the drug moves through the body and affects the fungus, and, most importantly, data from actual clinical outcomes. Breakpoints are what give that MIC number its real clinical meaning.
So, by comparing our patient's MIC to these established breakpoints, we can classify the isolate into one of three categories. If it's susceptible, great, we can be confident that standard therapy will likely work. If it's resistant, we know that therapy is likely to fail. And that intermediate category, sometimes called susceptible dose-dependent, is this crucial middle ground. It suggests that, yeah, we might achieve success, but only if we can increase the drug exposure, maybe by using a higher dose.
All right, let's bring all of this together. Knowing the theory is one thing, but applying it wisely is what actually improves patient outcomes. So here are some really high-yield points for both your exams and your clinical practice.
We don't need to perform AST on every single fungal isolate. It's a resource that we should use strategically. It is absolutely indicated for any invasive infection like a bloodstream infection. It's also crucial when a patient isn't responding to therapy, or when you're dealing with species that are known for acquired resistance, like Candida glabrata with azoles. And finally, it's a vital tool for public health, allowing us to track resistance trends in our own hospitals and communities.
One of the most important concepts to really master is intrinsic resistance. This is when an entire species is just naturally non-susceptible to a drug. For instance, you would never treat Cryptococcus with an echinocandin because it just lacks the drug's target, or treat Aspergillus with fluconazole. It's just not going to work. Knowing these patterns saves time, it reduces costs, and it prevents us from using ineffective therapy. Really, accurate species identification is the first step in good antifungal stewardship.
Let's finish up with some key clinical pearls. First, it is vital to distinguish between intrinsic resistance, that predictable trait of an entire species, and acquired resistance, which develops in a specific strain, often because of drug exposure. Second, be aware of something called trailing growth. It's this weird in vitro thing you see with azoles where a tiny bit of growth can be mistaken for resistance. It requires careful interpretation. Third, remember the difference between fungistatic agents, which just inhibit growth, and fungicidal agents, which actively kill the fungus. That distinction can be critical, especially in immunocompromised patients. And finally, before you even get your AST results back, your initial choice of therapy should always be guided by your local antibiogram data. That tells you the common resistance patterns in your specific patient population. The ultimate goal here, as this quote just beautifully summarizes, is not to test every fungus for every drug. It's about having a smart, selective strategy. We test when it matters most, guiding therapy for our sickest patients, preserving our very limited antifungal arsenal through good stewardship, and ultimately, improving clinical outcomes.
And that concludes our explainer on antifungal susceptibility testing. The principles we've discussed today are fundamental to modern infectious disease management. As resistance continues to grow, mastering this tool isn't optional anymore. It's essential. The question is no longer if we should use this tool, but how we can use it more intelligently to stay one step ahead in the fight against these formidable pathogens.